I go to my grandpa's every year to fish. My grandpa is used to telling a specific story when we're out. The story of the so-called Owl Man, or the Cheney Creek creature. He had always made these stories up. I was about 13 at the time, and I still had a wild imagination. I believed him for a while, but what happened that night changed everything. We had just got done with supper and we went to start a fire. We grabbed the logs and began to douse the logs in lighter fluid. As I turned to grab the lighter, I heard a branch snap. I turn and look and can't see anything in the darkness, so I continue to light the fire until I spotted a dark figure sort of crawling into the water. I don't say anything. I don't want to spook my younger brother, who was sitting in a chair behind me. My grandpa then went inside to grab some marshmallows, and everyone else follows. They leave me to watch the fire and tell me not to do anything stupid. I nod, laughing a little bit. While they're inside, I sit, now watching the creek. I hear water splashing in the direction of the creek. A chill runs up and down my spine. I feel as if I'm being watched. Looking round, I find a tall, dark figure standing far away by the creek, so I can't get a lot of detail. But then I watch it walk right back into the lake. As it did so, I heard a sound similar to chains rattling. As it crawls back into the water, it stares at me with bright yellow eyes and screeches. That screech was so awful, I covered my ears. I go to get my pellet gun, thinking it could protect me, but it acted more like a security blanket. I aimed it at the creek, kept my eye on the scope, and watched for every single movement I could. But the thing doesn't come back up. I'll never forget what happened that day, and I can still hear the rattling of chains in my head. It's so vivid. I don't ever want to hear it for real again. Right after I graduated high school, sometime in the early 2010s, I had a close group of friends that I did everything with. It consisted of my girlfriend, Ella, and my two best friends, Sean and Christian. It was early summer, mid-June, I believe. We decided we wanted to take a road trip and hang out in the mountains. We didn't live that far from the most iconic mountain in our state, so we headed that way in Sean's beloved Pontiac. He had affectionately named it Banshee. We packed the works, snacks, drinks, and after some pestering on my part, I was a bit of a safety nut, so I brought along some warmer coats, flashlights, and water. We were going to make a night of it, even if it meant driving back home at 1 in the morning, which we were all very accustomed to do at that point in our young adult lives. We ended up driving up an old, infrequently used logging road and parking near what seemed to be a good spot to start our impromptu hike. We parked the Banshee on the side of the road, which was about a foot away from a ditch that was about 5 feet deep and at minimum 10 feet across. On the other side of the ditch was a copse of small trees, young saplings, no more than 3 inches in diameter. It wasn't really safe to cross the ditch unless you used the narrow trail that cut through the ditch into the woods. So we ended up using that and headed into the woods to start our adventure. We spent the entire afternoon wandering and talking and basically just chewing the fat. Around early evening, we had settled down and started a small fire to keep warm. There was a clearing that we had discovered, and there was a fire pit from previous campers, so we used it to start a new fire. Since summer was only just beginning, the nights were still kind of chilly. This night wasn't any different, and being impulsive young adults, we were beginning to regret coming out without better gear, despite our coats and the fire. It was cold enough that our hands were too numb to open the snacks, so that began to damper our spirits. I was getting especially grumpy since I hadn't had a lot of sleep the night before. I was getting especially irritable sometime around 9. We'd only had junk food in our stomachs, and the smoke from the campfire was giving me a massive headache. At some point, I ended up bickering with Ella over some silly topic that I can't even remember now. I stormed off into the woods to cool off. Even though I knew the fight was silly, it had really upset me, and I was in tears for at least 5 or 10 minutes. I wasn't quiet about it either. When I finally started to calm down, a sound came to my attention. It was a not-so-distant, rhythmic knocking, like someone hitting trees with a stick. I knew it wasn't any of the others, because I was close enough that I could still hear them talking, and I would have heard them approaching, since there was so much debris on the ground. My heart stopped, then started pounding as I listened to the other sounds that began accompanying the knocking. Breathing like a heavy, deep breathing, as if whatever was breathing was getting mad, and I mean angry. The knocking was getting more and more deliberate, intense. It sounded like if whatever was being hit was hit any harder, it would snap. Now, I'm a big fan of myths and the supernatural, and my state is famous for its Bigfoot sightings. Heck, even some of my family have claimed to see Bigfoot. I didn't want to jump to any conclusions, but the first thing I thought of was that Bigfoot communicates by knocking on trees with sticks. My heart was skipping beats. Here I was in the middle of nowhere, and I hadn't had the good grace to grab a flashlight before I stormed off. The knocking, the breathing, it was all getting closer. So, I was out of there. I turned around, heading back the way I came, luckily coming right back to the campsite. The fire had been put out, and my friends were gone. I could hear them calling for me from the direction of the road. I quickly answered them and said that I was coming. The knocking was further away now, but still aggressive and sharp in its retort. I finally made it back to the Banshee, which was idling in the middle of the road. Ella, Sean, and Christian stood near the front of the car, looking just as freaked out as I was. Apparently, they'd heard the knocking too, and decided to call it quits then, thinking that I'd find my way back to the car eventually. Calling me hadn't been an option since there was zero reception out there. I assured them it was fine, but then we had the absolute crap scared out of us. It all happened so quickly, it felt like it was happening in slow motion. There was an eruption of snapping noises, as something huge just casually brushed those saplings aside in the same way a normal person would walk through tall grass. We could see trees snapping like toothpicks in the light from the headlights. The breathing was audible now, along with an angry grunting noise. The next thing we knew, a large humanoid figure, at least 9 feet tall, appeared out of the tree line. It didn't even pause before it leapt over the ditch. It just casually stepped over it, like you would if you were stepping off a curb. It cleared the ditch completely and landed in a crouch in the center of the road, looking at us as it did. We'd been frozen in shock at the sound and the creature's appearance, but when it landed in the middle of the road after jumping the ditch like a kid playing hopscotch, we scrambled, comically so, piling over each other to get into the Banshee. Then we sped away. I remember looking back and seeing it charging after us as we drove away, but it quickly gave up the chase and returned to its woods. We decided after that encounter that we'd just stick to normal, populated areas for hanging out. Areas far away from that thing. Before I begin my story, I'd like to give some background on why I'm writing this in the first place. I do not believe in skinwalkers or any sort of cryptid. However, the subject fascinates the living hell out of me. The other day on the r/Skinwalkers subreddit, I saw and responded to a question that read, "Why do you believe in skinwalkers?" with my beliefs, and gave an extremely brief overview of what led me to learn about skinwalkers. This seemed to attract some attention or curiosity, so I figured that I might as well write about it, since I have nothing else to do, being stuck at home now. It happened in a very small town called Elbert, Colorado, that's very far out in the middle of nowhere. Like a grocery trip took a 45-minute drive just to get to a store. I moved out there in the summer of 2013 when I was 11. My family lived on an 8-acre piece of property in a fairly thick pine forest, with a house just outside the very edge of it. The driveway to the house was a super crappy, super long dirt road that led out to the main street that had to be a little less than an eighth of a mile away from the house. To this day, I think that place was the most peaceful place I'd ever been to. The only sounds that could be heard were those of nature and our chickens, as we could not hear the rare car that would pass by. The nights there were the best part of the place, though. Because of the lack of city lights, I was able to see every detail of the night sky, down to the dimmest star. Because of the darkness, however, you weren't able to see a single thing below the horizon of the night sky. Along with that, there were several packs of coyotes that lived out there, and every night they'd all be howling at each other. With enough of them, the noise would almost sound like water. The only thing that really sucked about the property, however, was the walk that we had to make just to take the trash out. The garbage company would only accept the cans that were brought to the main road. We'd normally take the trash out before it got dark, but on occasion I'd forget and would have to do it at dark, which I normally didn't mind. The trip would be a super peaceful walkout, and we had headlamps at the ready so that we could actually see where we were going in the dark. Well, the summer before I moved out, there was a night where I forgot to take out the trash during the day, and the batteries on the headlamps were dead. This meant I had to try to navigate my way down our driveway, almost completely blind. I went outside and stood next to the trash cans for a minute or two, staring into the darkness in order to hopefully adjust my eyes. Staring into the darkness, though, I felt as if there was something off. The normal coyote sounds were gone, and for some reason, my eyes just wouldn't adjust to the dark. I kept staring into that abyss, looking for any sign that my eyes might be adjusting, but to no luck. Then this terrible feeling tore its way into my chest. The best way I can describe it is as if this darkness, this abyss I was staring into, was staring back at, no, into me. I was frozen with fear. I knew I was alone out there, but something told me that if I were to walk into the dark, I would not return. I continued to stare, almost unable to look away from the darkness for a long time before my mom came out to check on me. Her opening the door seemed to break me out of the trance, and I ran to her and began crying. She looked at me confused and noticed that I still had not taken out the trash. After telling her about how I felt, she laughed a little and gave me some encouraging words telling me if there was anything out there, our dogs would have noticed it by now. She then told me to come back in 10 minutes for ice cream. I turned back around and walked back to the trash cans, shaking. I had never been so scared in my life, and what of? Nothing? I chuckled to myself, realizing the absurdity of it. When I took my eyes back off the ground, the chuckle turned back into a cry. I realized that I wasn't scared of nothing. I was terrified that there was something out there that I could not see, waiting for me to leave the light of the house lamp to attack. Then the coyotes started back up, and my eyes began to adjust. Whatever might have been there was gone, along with all of my fear. The tears stopped along with most of the fear, and I was able to start dragging the trash cans down. The walk was somewhat scary, though I was able to let the sound of the coyotes distract me. By the time I got back to the house, I felt safe again, but I could not stop thinking about that abyss. While we lived in that house, that was probably my scariest encounter. There were other scary encounters while I was there, but the only one that could even slightly relate to the other takes place at my friend's house. For the sake of privacy, I'll refer to him as D. D had a property that was about 10 minutes from mine, and we shared the same forest, with the only separation being a road in between us. We had been hanging out for a while that day, playing a bunch of video games, when I had an idea to go out in the dark and explore his property. He agreed, and so we waited until night fell. After a few more hours of video games and dinner, it finally seemed dark enough to go out. So we did. We were wandering his 7-acre property, being pretty stupid, loud, and making half-assed attempts at trying to get each other a little scared. After some time of this, we eventually wandered into a clearing, and I guess the attempts at scaring each other settled in for both of us at the same time. Together we looked around, concerned. There was something off, and it felt like we were being watched. Trying to keep a good mood, and maybe trying to keep my mind off of whatever was making us feel this way, I suggested we make a scary video to scare D's little brother. D laughed and agreed and pulled out his phone. We began to record. We were acting like we kept seeing things in the woods. I would throw a stick when the camera was facing away, making weird grunting sounds, in order to make the video creepy. We both were having a good time. However, deep down, I felt like something was very off, and I think that he did too. Then, out of nowhere, a twig snapped behind us. I automatically assumed that D had thrown something, but when I looked at him to confirm, he was looking at me to see if I had thrown it. Before this moment, I was trying very hard to make my voice sound as scared as possible for the video. However, as soon as I heard this, I didn't need to try anymore. We stared in the direction that the twig snap had come from, hoping to make out something, but to no avail. Once again, my eyes would not adjust to the dark, except this time, instead of physically standing in the light, I was inside the darkness. Partially for the video and partially for my sanity, I whispered, "Run." D nodded slightly, his face illuminated by his phone. Then we started sprinting in the direction of his house. I don't think I had run so hard in my life beforehand, but there was a feeling in my gut still telling me that we weren't fast enough, that we needed to hide. D must have felt the same thing. He took the lead and led us to a nearby cat shed. A motion sensor light flicked on as we passed by, and we got in the shed as quickly as we could. After getting the door shut, D turned on his light, revealing the inside of the shed. At the time, it seemed to me like the cats were hiding from something too. However, looking back on it, they were probably just sleeping in their beds that were in a corner of the shed. This freaked me out even more. D started climbing the wall of the shed, leading us onto a shelf-like structure that had a window we could look out of. D sat on one side of the window and I sat on the other. We were facing each other, and we could see both angles from the window. Eventually, with the light on the outside and the added comfort of a roof over our heads, we started to calm down and focus on the video again. As we were talking about what might have been out there, the motion sensor light turned off, dropping the outside back into the dark. We went quiet as the uneasy feeling washed over us again. To me, it didn't feel like we were being watched anymore, more like we were being looked for. We stared intently out the window, looking for signs of anything, when I thought I started hearing footsteps. Having a wall between us and the steps muffled them, so I couldn't be sure what I was hearing. I asked D about it, and he said that he heard them too. However, I'm pretty sure he was saying that for the video. We went quiet again, listening. Then I heard the footsteps get slightly louder. One of the cats started rubbing up against us, which distracted us and caused us to turn around and start petting him. Because who wouldn't pet a cat? As we were petting him, the outdoor motion sensor light flicked on. I felt goosebumps crawl up my arms to my face. As we slowly turned around, we looked out the window and saw nothing. Dee told me that we should get inside, and I agreed with him. We carried the cat back down to its bed and got ready to make a 50-yard sprint directly to his house. He opened the door and I shut it, and then we were in the cold, dark woods, running as hard as we could from whatever turned on that light. After what felt like forever of sprinting, we finally got to Dee's front door and we rushed inside. We slammed his sliding glass door and didn't sleep until we saw the sun rising the next day. Though these encounters were terrifying at the time, a lot of it can be easily explained by me just freaking myself out. There was nothing out there during the trash can story, and at Dee's house we found raccoon prints the next morning outside of the cat shed. None of these things ever stopped me from loving the woods, and within a week I was certain that I was just making things up to myself. I continued loving the woods we lived in for the next year that we lived there, but eventually my family and I ended up moving out. My dad got a job offer in Minnesota that would improve our financial situation and not force my dad into a 2-hour commute every day. Minnesota, however, proved to be the worst place that I've lived in, at least for the first year or two. After living in such a small town and adapting to my friends in Elbert, I found it very hard to make friends in Minnesota. I was constantly thinking about my friends and the girlfriend I'd left in Elbert, and I refused to work to make friends, and the people at my new school did not particularly seem to like me. I would still talk to my Elbert friends almost every night, playing video games and stuff with them, which seemed to be the only thing to make me sort of happy while I was there. With my mental health in the garbage and my lack of friends, my parents agreed to let me go to Elbert during the summer and visit them. After the first visit, my mental health was way better. I started opening up to other people at the new school. So my parents agreed to make the Elbert trips annual as long as I planned them. Yeah, I've got the coolest parents ever, of all time maybe. So every year since then I've been visiting my friends in Elbert. But the most recent visit is the reason that I'm writing this. Every year I would hang out with my friends K, T, and D, the same D from the other story. Because of stupid teenage drama, they would almost never hang out together. One of my favorite things to do with them was ironically go squatching. Squatching is looking for Bigfoot, typically making their hypothetical calls and using other communication methods in hopes of finding one. This was simply an excuse to go yell in the woods at night for me. This most recent visit, I finally had managed to get K, T, and D to all hang out together. We had planned on making a short film that was based on these stupid videos that T and I used to make. We tried to film it, but we ended up with like one scene before we decided to just play video games instead. One day after dinner, the group came up with an idea to make a squatching video. T, K, and I filmed one last year, so we figured that we'd do another one this year and try to make it an annual thing. We took K's little brother out with us to film for us, and we started recording the video. The sun was still up, so we had no intention of being any sort of scary, just a funny, ironic video. We wandered around for an hour, making crappy Australian accents and shouting for Bigfoot, when Kay had the idea that we could split up and look for Sasquatch. So we did. We each went off on our own into the woods, with the cameraman following me, each making the occasional squatch call and tree knock. We had some walkie-talkies with us, so we were able to tell each other when we were making a call. After some time, D and T and I found each other and decided to group up and meet Kay in a clearing. We began walking, and Kay came in over the radio, saying that he was about to make another call. We waited, and from the forest came the most terrifying noise I've ever heard someone make. The best way I could describe it, it was like a dying elephant that had a smoking problem. Then he came in over the radio.
"Was that you guys?"
he asked. We assumed that he was joking around for the video, so we joked back. "Nah, mate, we've pissed the Squatch off. We need to get out of here. Meet us back at your house." Then we ran out of the forest quickly. When we met up with Kay, he apparently had cut himself on some barbed wire, and that, plus the terrifying scream we heard, seemed to put us off. We decided to stop for the time being. We went inside and played Halo for hours, messing with each other and doing other stupid things, not mentioning what had happened while squatching for the rest of the night. When night had more than passed, and it was around midnight, we decided to go back outside and do more squatching, this time without a camera and with a bunch of flashlights. We decided to go pretty deep into the forest before making any calls, so as to not wake Kay's family or the neighbors up. Eventually, we got to the point that we had split up from earlier and had to decide what to do from there. After talking about it some, we decided to see where Kay had run off to. Then I made the first squatch call of the night. After the call, the woods went completely silent. In my previous story, I talked about the abyss watching me. This was almost the same, except it felt as if the forest were listening to us. We laughed about it and poked fun at each other, trying to creep one another out, and we began to walk. Kay led us pretty deep into his woods and eventually stopped in a small opening, showing us that this had been where he had radioed us from before the call. The thing is, Kay didn't refer to the call as his. He referred to it as one of ours. This didn't register at the moment, but thinking back on it, it definitely gives me the creeps. After a bit more joking around, Kay decided to take us to the boundary of his property, where he had cut himself on barbed wire. We walked in a straight line toward the fence, and I think Kay figured we'd follow the fence to where he cut himself. As we walked deeper into the forest, though, our jokes started to die down. The silence, darkness, and this feeling started getting to us. We were starting to suspect that we were being watched. We arrived at the fence and began walking along when Kay stopped, confused. I looked at where his flashlight was pointing, and there was the fence. However, the fence was almost dented, if that makes sense. It looked like something had come through and simply stepped on the fence with enough weight that the fence could not bring itself to its natural position. I showed my flashlight into the other property and asked Kay about it. I can't remember exactly what he told me, but I think I remember him saying that it was a large piece of Native American land and had once been sacred or something like that. That was probably terribly wrong, so take that info with a grain of salt. Our group looked at each other. "Let's go over it," I remember myself saying. "Worst case scenario, we find whoever's property it is and we can tell him about the broken gate." This was obviously not the worst case scenario, especially out in the country like this, but we continued anyway. After going through some more pretty heavy woods, we found a clearing, and then we felt something awful. The hair on the back of all our necks stood up at once. We began hearing slight twig snaps in every direction. This was a massive change from the previously quiet forest that we had just been walking through. We quickly shined our lights every which way, looking for anything that could be causing our fear. Then Dee's light stopped on something. "Guys, do you see that?" We all shined our lights on the spot that he was looking at. I couldn't see anything at first, and was about to say no when I made out what looked to be the reflection of eyes. We each confirmed one by one, each of us starting to make out the eyes. Then we did something stupid. We started walking toward it. Maybe this was because there were 4 of us and 1 pair of eyes, or maybe it was how alluring they looked. Every step we took, the more they faded out, until we could not see them anymore. Then we felt the hairs on the back of our necks stand up more, as if pointing in the direction of something that did not approve of us being there. We stood back to back, making a square, as we felt the presence circling us. "Guys, let's get out of here," one of us said. We all nodded and waited. Then when the time felt right, we sprinted. We all ran as fast as we could, jumping over the fallen fence through the forest, until eventually I saw the house. I heard the others run by me, hidden by the forest, when I suddenly stopped.
"Ryan, help."
My heart sank. I had just heard the other three run by me, yet this was the perfect voice of Kay calling for help. I shoved the thought that this could be Kay out of my head. After all, I had just heard all three of them run by. I began sprinting again, hoping to catch up with Kay. After sprinting for a minute or two, I caught up with them, beginning to slow down, almost at the house. I caught up with Kay and was about to try to talk to him when we both flinched backward, almost falling. Just to the right of us, there was a crashing thud of something that had just hit the ground. We quickly recovered and sprinted toward the door, urging the others on. When we finally got back to Kay's house, we slammed the door behind us and had to just rest, panting. When we all seemed to calm down, Kay asked what the hell happened out there. We all went around sharing what we saw. D said he saw the reflection of eyes, and more than what we saw in the clearing. Kay said he saw the reflection of eyes in the clearing and heard the two thuds that freaked us out. T said he might have seen the eyes in the clearing and some yellow-red ones as we were closing the door. I stated what I saw, but decided to leave out the voice, since I wasn't and still am not sure I heard what I heard. We sat down, and almost immediately began searching up cryptids and looking for other stories like ours. Within half an hour, our primary theories were of a goat man, a Jersey devil, or a Wendigo. Almost in response to our theories, we heard two ever-so-quiet footsteps on the roof. Eventually, we went to sleep, but after that, we never spoke a word of it again. Maybe a year or so later, I was trying to creep myself out when I stumbled upon stories about Wendigos. These stories sounded familiar to my experience, but didn't seem to be quite right. That led into a rabbit hole, and eventually I learned about skinwalkers too. Since then, I've loved hearing stories about them, and I'm very fascinated with what they are and how they hunt. I've stopped believing recently, however, after rethinking my tale for the 100th time. I'm 90% sure that what we heard and saw was just a horse, and that we got onto the bad side of it. What really spooks me, though, however, is when I let the 10% wander, and I think that it might have been something paranormal. Either way, I don't understand how Kay still lives on that property. I'll be visiting him again this summer, so I'll see them again. But hopefully, we will not encounter what we might have encountered last time. My sister and I were one day heading out to her friend's house. Apparently, her friend lived out in the country, and there was a supposedly haunted graveyard near their house. So we left about 8:30 or 9 p.m. We would pick him up and visit the graveyard. This happened in October of 2019, by the way. When we got there and were finally driving up his driveway, on both sides of the dirt road there were these long cornfields. I could reach out my window and touch them, they were so close to us. As we pulled into his driveway, we saw this black little animal that looked like a skunk, but it didn't have any white on it. We called it a skunk and left it at that. We picked up her friend and talked for a bit. 5 minutes later, as we were driving back down the dirt road, I was sitting in the back passenger seat, looking out the front window. About 10 feet from the car, I saw something sticking its long, stretched-out neck over the corn stalks in the field. These corn stalks are taller than me. I couldn't really see the shape of the head, but I could see its bright eyes, looking and blinking at the car. I didn't say anything. I don't know why. I may have been in shock or just curious, but when we got about 5 feet from it, I saw it slowly move its head back into the field. As we drove by where it was, I tried to search for it from the window, but I couldn't find it. We continued on to the graveyard and didn't see anything else. But even my sister said that she felt as if she was being watched the moment we picked our friend up.